Hello lovelies, Rock and Roll Jesus here. Daniel Fox, designer of Zweihander and notorious in numerous ways, in numerous gaming circles, so it's all goss and a bit kind of inside baseball. Anyway, he appeared on Nerdcognito this week, so I suggest going and listening to that if you care about this sort of stuff and RPG industry drama and whatever. Now, I've always said that I would talk to anyone, even people who are hostile towards me in the gaming space, and hardly anyone has ever taken me up on it. Indestructible is probably the only talk that went anything like I originally envisioned would be the result of such an offer, but most people won't even come near me, which is a bit unfair. And I would say that probably from the other side of whatever culture camp for zeitgeist is going on, Dan Fox is probably someone that most people would steer away from. However, Mr. Ryan David and Kyle and Nerdcognito decided that they would talk to him. It was a fairly lengthy back and forth, not exactly an interview, not exactly an interrogation, not exactly a conversation. It's just a fairly sort of meandering chat, possibly part of a sort of apology tour. I don't know. So Daniel has not been the best to me, or I would say to the gaming industry and community, though many people don't like that word, as a whole. He's joined in on dog piles against me, he's rumour mongered against me, he's spread rumours and so on about me, so he has a fairly steep hill to climb to get any sort of redemption in my eyes, though he did say that he owed me an apology, and I suppose I would be happy to take one. I don't know what we would actually talk about if we did, but yeah, I still did say I would talk to anyone, and that's true. No, not just to Fox, even to people who actively want to be hostile to me or to attempt to get gotchas and so on. There were a few things said about me during that interview which I feel I should address, and a couple of topics that I also feel I should address. So what am I politically? He describes me as a classically English libertarian. I try to avoid the term libertarian because, like most political terminology, Americans don't really understand what it means, or it has come to mean something very strange in the American political context. I am a left anarchist, a communitarian. I am way down, almost all the way down in the bottom left-hand corner of the political compass, if you use that at least as a point of reference. Not fiscally libertarian or organisationally, but certainly socially. I think if you want to understand me, think about all the things that I have encountered in my life and the way in which that might shape my thinking when it comes to current goings on. I lived through the Satanic Panic, the Vampire Panic. I lived through the Video Nasties Panic. My favourite comic, 2000 AD, used to be regularly somewhat controversial in the eyes of the wider public, and its direct predecessor, Action, effectively got banned. I've experienced a lot of these things over the years, Jack Thompson, or even earlier computer game panics as well. So when I'm presented with yet another set of ideologues with a criticism-resistant ideology, trying to control and suppress and censor people's artistic expression, I take umbrage, because I have always taken umbrage at these sorts of things. And the same kinds of assertions. It doesn't matter whether they're being made by a man in a frock and a white collar, or a woman in a frock with a bogus degree. It's the same shit, different year, really. Whether it's a religious critique of games or a feminist critique of games, it all amounts to the same largely unevidenced nonsense when you actually get into it. So that's why I am as I am. A bitter experience over a long time, and being a keen student of history and communications and all manner of other useful things that relate to this. So yeah, I'm a left anarchist. I wouldn't call myself a libertarian, but that's largely because people don't understand what small l libertarianism means. Libertine, certainly, but still. He mentions me leaving inappropriate characters around the whole COVID thing. Now, I'm not exactly immunocompromised, but I am immunosuppressed. I had very bad childhood asthma, so my lung capacity is not the greatest. So I'm vulnerable, if not like death sentence, if I get COVID necessarily. But yeah, obviously that shifted my thinking on that in a certain direction. I also have friends who are immunosuppressed and immunocompromised in a way worse than I am due to cancer treatments and so on. And it was that and the COVID denialism that was going on there that was the step too far for me, right? That rose to the level of the harm principle, because by spreading such conspiracist nonsense and encouraging people against various important public health measures, that's something that, you know, contributes to deaths, and I'm not cool with that. I am cool with different opinions and so on, but facts are facts, and there's no getting around them. And these things were necessary at the time. Some places they're probably still necessary, but that's by the by, I guess. But a lot of people have chosen to condemn me because I dared to appear on the same show as Pundit and Vengeance Satanis. But I felt that having a different and an oppositional, even point of view present on there was important. Right? Sure, it's the Fox News liberal role, I suppose, that it was that I fulfilled, but I thought that was still valuable. You know, pushing back in whatever slight way or representing a different point of view, and yet I get condemned for hanging out with people. Well, I can hang out with people I don't agree with, unless things go too far, of course. I don't know. I don't get the criticism there, and I don't think it's laudable that I left. It does seem to have changed his thinking on me. May have done that to others, but I don't think it was a particularly great thing to do. It's just I couldn't tolerate staying in the company of people who I thought were doing actual physical harm to others through the spread of misinformation. But it was still a mild betrayal of my principles to do so. I was between a rock and a hard place. I don't think I've said bad things, as he has said in that podcast. I think there's some good things that have been willfully misinterpreted. I believe at a previous time he mentioned that I'd done a Nazi origin for the last Wizards version of Gamma World, which is true, but there's various contexts stripped from that. In that, at the time, I was arguing with another creator who was making all kinds of hyperbolic accusations towards me. So that was, in a way, trolling them, which is petty, but also funny, I think. They were kind of a prototypical social justice warrior of the era, shall we say. And also because Nazis show up in all kinds of B movies and, you know, drive-in movies and exploitation flicks and so on, which clearly had a fairly sizable influence on Gamma World. So there not being Nazis always struck me as a little bit odd and weird. So I felt that was useful as well. He talks about piracy for a while and uses that to justify his participation in the censorship of the Trove, which has been a huge blow to preservation of old tabletop RPGs and the scans thereof. Now, sure, there was an amount of modern piracy going on there, of course, but I felt that cost was worth paying for the sake of preserving all of these old and obscure games and tomes within that sort of centralized database. Yeah, they probably went too far in monetizing it and so on, but running these things costs money, so they got to recoup it somehow, in some way, right? And in my experience, piracy of my products has led directly to sales. It creates a good word of mouth and a good reputation for good products that you've put out. Now, I'm sure that's not the case for someone like Wizards, who will view every lost copy as a lost sale. But for smaller producers, I think he also harmed their prospects by being involved in taking down the Trove. And let's be real here. Most people who pirate this stuff, it's not a lost sale. And in fact, it may well be a picked up sale because people read the PDF, enjoy it, and then want the hard copy book or decide they want to support the author in some other way. The other thing that I thought he was very off on during the discussion was cultural appropriation. Quite early in the discussion, he talks about how it's a relatively small minority that's very loud, that has this effect on gaming culture as a whole, and yet within the same interview he succumbs to this very force that he was being critical of when it comes to cultural appropriation. There is nothing that meaningfully prevents anyone writing a game in any particular setting, right? I'm English, I'm British. Our mythological culture and identity is a mess. You've got Nordic influence, Celtic influence, Pictic influence. You've got Welsh, Irish, Scots, English, Angles, Saxons, Normans. There's a whole bunch of shit here. Huguenots that came over from France, Windrush, all kinds of influences on British culture and mythology. But sticking to the older stuff, Arthurian legend, Norse monsters, Celtic gods, all of this stuff, and all of that culture, and medieval Europe as a whole, and medieval Britain in particular, has been a huge influence on tabletop RPGs, and our culture as the Brits has been appropriated by American game companies, largely of various types, for their worlds, and no one gives a fuck. So, and I don't think there's a problem, because I think anyone can research and read and look up and create their own Disneyland version of British mythology. Why should we care? Right? But if we're going to be so damned concerned by everyone else's culture, then we should be concerned by these cultures as well, right? But it obviously doesn't make any sense to do so. Who is going to know more about authentic Szechuan culture, right? Someone who's third generation immigrant, barely speaks Chinese, works in his parents' takeaway shop on the weekends, but doesn't particularly have any interest in Chinese culture, doesn't experience much Chinese culture day to day, or a Westerner who has spent his entire academic career studying that particular region of China, but isn't Chinese. Blood isn't magic. That's a very racist sort of idea to hold, and I do find a lot of these people who make this fuss about cultural appropriation to be rather racist, ironically. And then there's things like foreigners' interest in customs and traditions of particular areas can keep those cultural things alive. The Japanese are quite keen on Westerners wearing kimonos and so on because it keeps that tradition alive in a way that is dying out slowly in Japan. I don't think it's as cut and dried, as simple or as easy to work around this mentally as Daniel seems to suggest. And as the people who criticised him and tried to get involved in one of his projects suggests. And I also think, he described how a project went from 1 or 2 writers to a staff of 30. That's unsustainable in this business on marginal products. And so, Tetsubo never happened. So we never got this Eastern adventure setting for Zweihander, if we even wanted it. So isn't that worse in terms of representation and inclusion? Because it couldn't get done, because you were looking for a unicorn. Anyway, I wonder if all of this is just that Mr. Fox has had a bit of a taste of his own medicine in more recent years, and so has come to understand and sympathise more with other people who've been victims of these kinds of attacks, or what. But I would be willing to talk to him, or again, anybody else, hostile to me or otherwise. Zhang.
At the end of World War II, the Axis and the Allies went to war with A-bombs until nobody was left to fight. In this atomic wasteland, a new breed of rockabilly hero arises. From the gleaming domes of Science City Zero to the sleazy roller derbies of Vegas and the sky fortress of the Fourth Reich, there's a new world for the taking. 45, Psychobilly Retropocalypse, available at lulu.com and RPG Now.